Episode 4, The Ties That Bind. Eli's mind was foggy as he stood in the dark clearing, his pulse steady but heavy, like a distant drumbeat echoing through his body. The early morning light barely broke through the dense trees, casting long, thin shadows around him and Lila. She lay on the ground beside him, her breathing shallow, her eyes wide but distant. Jasper Doone, the mysterious recluse who had guided him, looked at them both with a mixture of relief and dread. "You did well," Jasper said, his voice a low murmur, "but the shadow doesn't forget those who defy it. Now, you've marked yourself, and Lila, with a bond that can't easily be broken." Eli looked down at Lila, who seemed disoriented, her lips moving without sound as though haunted by memories she couldn't escape. He took her hand, trying to offer her a small comfort, though a sliver of terror still lingered in his chest. "She's safe now, isn't she?" he asked, his voice carrying a hint of desperation. "We pulled her out of that darkness." Jasper glanced at him, his expression grim. "The shadow doesn't let go so easily. You may have freed her for now, but it will find a way back. It always does." After making sure Lila was safe at home with her family, Eli tried to shake off the unease that gnawed at him. The shadow wasn't just a myth or a superstition, he had faced it and felt its cold, insidious grip. And though he had managed to bring Lila back, he knew the battle wasn't over. Determined to get answers, Eli visited the town's library again, where he searched through every record, newspaper, and journal he could find on Black Hollow. The town's history was long and troubled, filled with whispers of disappearances, strange rituals, and mysteries. Then he stumbled upon something chilling, an old, nearly forgotten record dating back over 100 years. The document described an event known as the Binding of Black Hollow. It was a time when the town's founders had supposedly made a pact with something in the woods, binding it to the land in exchange for protection. But as the years passed, it became clear that the protection came with a price, the lives of those the shadow chose. Eli couldn't believe it, the very founders of Black Hollow had invited this darkness and tethered it to the town. He felt a shiver run down his spine as he realized that the disappearances over the years, including Lila's, weren't mere accidents. They were sacrifices, paid, willingly or not, to keep the shadow at bay. As he turned to leave the library, he caught the eye of George, the librarian. George gave him a wary look, glancing at the documents Eli had gathered. "You're digging where you shouldn't, Detective," George murmured, casting a furtive glance around. "Some secrets are meant to stay buried." Eli squared his shoulders, meeting George's gaze. "And why's that?" "The people of this town deserve to know the truth about what's happened here." George sighed, a deep, tired sound. "Maybe they do, but knowing the truth won't change what's coming. The shadow won't be satisfied with just one life. And the deeper you dig, the more you invite its wrath." Despite the warning, Eli was more determined than ever. Whatever hold the shadow had over Black Hollow, he intended to break it. He thanked George and left, clutching the documents as if they were a lifeline. That night, Eli returned to his own room, where sleep refused to come. He found himself staring into the shadows, his mind racing with thoughts of the pact, the disappearances, and the centuries-old curse that loomed over Black Hollow. Just as he felt himself finally drifting off, a faint sound echoed through the room, a whisper, low and raspy, like dry leaves skittering over stone. "Leave, while you can." Eli's heart skipped a beat. The voice was different from Lila's, a malevolent hiss filled with loathing. He sat up, scanning the room, but saw nothing out of place. He rubbed his eyes, dismissing it as a lingering nightmare. Yet as he lay back down, he felt something cold brush against his cheek, a sensation like icy fingers trailing down his face. Bolting upright, Eli reached for the light, but just as his fingers touched the switch, the room fell deathly silent. A shadow shifted in the corner, darker than the rest, coalescing into a shape, a figure, tall and thin, with hollow, empty eyes that seemed to bore into his soul. The figure moved closer, its face obscured, but the sense of malice it radiated was overwhelming. Eli froze, unable to look away, as the shadow stretched toward him, its hand extended as if to claim him. Then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, the shadow dissolved into the darkness, leaving Eli alone, his heart pounding, his skin clammy with sweat. He knew, without a doubt, that this was a warning, a promise of what awaited him if he continued his investigation. The following day, Eli sought out Evelyn again, needing answers only she could provide. He found her in her garden, her hands dirt-stained from tending to a collection of plants that looked as old as she was. She glanced up as he approached, her expression resigned. "You saw it, didn't you?" she asked, not unkindly. "The shadow doesn't take kindly to those who meddle in its affairs." Eli nodded, unable to hide the lingering fear in his eyes. "Evelyn, I need to know more. The binding, the pact that the town made with this thing. Why did they do it? And how can it be broken?" Evelyn's hand stilled as she looked at him, her eyes filled with sorrow. The founders were desperate. Black Hollow was plagued by disease, famine, and endless hardship. They believed that by making a pact with the darkness in the woods, they would be spared. They were right, Black Hollow prospered. But the price was steep. Eli felt a pang of anger. They sold out the lives of their people. Generations sacrificed to keep this town safe. Evelyn nodded, her expression heavy. "And as long as the pact holds, the town will remain protected. But the shadow grows hungrier with each passing year, demanding more lives, more pain. It's no longer content with what we give." Eli's jaw clenched. "Then we have to end it. Whatever hold this thing has over Black Hollow, we have to break it." Evelyn looked away, her face drawn. To break the binding, the shadow's vessel must be found and destroyed, but no one knows what, or who, that vessel is. It could be anything, anyone. Eli's thoughts raced. If there was a vessel binding the shadow to Black Hollow, he would find it. He would end this nightmare, free Lila, and break the curse. But as he left Evelyn's home, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched, that something dark was following him, waiting for him to make a mistake. That evening, as he walked back through town, Eli noticed a small group of children huddled near the entrance to the woods, whispering in hushed voices. One of them, a young boy with dark hair and a serious expression, held a crude drawing of a figure with hollow eyes and shadowy limbs. Eli knelt beside them, curious. "What's that you've got there?" The boy looked up, his face pale and wary. "It's the Shadow Man. He lives in the woods. We heard him last night." Eli's pulse quickened. "You've seen him?" The boy nodded. "Sometimes we dare each other to go into the woods, to see who can get the closest without hearing him. But last night, he was closer than he's ever been." The other children nodded in agreement, fear flickering in their eyes. Eli felt a cold dread settle over him. The shadow was no longer content to stay in the woods, it was moving, creeping closer to the town, reaching for those who dared defy it. He sent the children home, watching them disappear into the safety of their homes, before he continued toward his inn. But as he walked, he felt a prickling sensation on the back of his neck, as if unseen eyes were following him. He quickened his pace, refusing to look back, yet the sensation only grew stronger, more insistent. By the time he reached his room, he was nearly running. He slammed the door shut, his heart racing as he leaned against the wood, trying to catch his breath. He was being hunted, stalked by something that wanted him gone. As he sat on the edge of his bed, trying to calm his frayed nerves, he heard a soft, insistent scratching at the window. His blood ran cold as he looked up, his eyes widening in horror. Outside, silhouetted against the darkness, was the figure he had seen the night before, tall, thin, and hollow-eyed, its face pressed against the glass, its mouth stretched in a twisted, hungry smile. "Leave," it whispered, its voice filling the room like a hiss of smoke. "Or you'll end up like the others." With a strangled breath, Eli reached for the curtains, pulling them shut, hoping to block out the sight of the hollow-eyed figure. His pulse thundered in his ears as he backed away, clutching his hands together to steady them. The shadow was coming for him, he had crossed a line, disturbed something best left untouched. After a tense moment, he heard the scratching cease. The room plunged into silence, but the sensation of being watched lingered. Eli knew he couldn't let fear take hold. He steadied himself, reminding himself of his purpose, to uncover the truth, to put an end to the curse, and to free Black Hollow from the malevolent force that held it captive. As he sat alone in the dark, Eli's resolve hardened. If the shadow was bound to Black Hollow by a vessel, he would find it. And whatever the price, he would end the curse once and for all. End of episode 4.